political amnesty and then get all the social service benefits without any contribution to the society.
Really happen?
Well, I think, you know, there's an.
I mean, in terms of, that circumstance, getting on a plane, declaring amnesty means they had to have money for the flight,
sure,
et cetera, et cetera, and they had to come from money. And those people get what you're talking about, but they're very small.
Well,
we have a significant Cuban population that might not have money and get on a raft and do that.
But they automatically are given that.
Well, but again, that's a perfect example of the selective discrimination on immigration into our country. You know, just because you happen to come from Cuba. You spoke of Guatemala. You know, the United States government never recognized the civil war that took place in Guatemala and the people whose lives were threatened there, as Guatemalans who tried to get sanctuary in the United States, who were denied that because our State Department didn't recognize them as political refugees. So, you know, that's one of the big problems I see, Augie, is that we don't have a fair policy of immigration. Until we get to that fair policy, this whole idea of every 10 or 15 years doing amnesty based upon the children living here or their parents or whatever, you know, is really sort of a foolish policy. I mean, you know, I don't care if it's Israel or Australia or many, many other countries. They have gotten into trouble socially because their social net, service net in the UK, in France, you know, has become disrupted because of not having, you know, a solid immigration policy. And I think you look around the world until we develop that.
I mean, the European comparative doesn't work. From what I understand what you're saying, that it needs to be more clearly defined. But in the case of France, for example, or Europe, any of the European countries, there are no borders except for England. And then really there are no borders there either. They just wave people right on through. There's no looking at passports. If you have a European passport, you go through any of the borders. It doesn't matter what country you came from. So if one country like Germany has Turks there, the Turks migrate in, and pretty soon you've got the Islamic people en masse. But here...
But that's not the case, for instance, in Spain, where they're coming from Africa, you know, and they're coming in...
We're going to come back to this. Yeah. And so we're going to break right now. The Hispanic population, which are 20% now nationally and growing, taking over Texas, taking over, I think it's more than 50% in California, is going to be a factor. Those borders are going to be of no point down the road. It's just, it's an impossible, like the drug war, the war on civil rights, which is really what it's turned into. I saw, I think, Pat Robertson on television the other day saying, why do we want to spend all this money incarcerating people over a puff of smoke? Which is a terribly silly, ironic thing to do. Pat Robertson, of all people, very right-wing conservative. So the issues...
Well, Scott's talking about our incarceration procedures in the state of Florida. Yeah. You know, I mean, we're spending all this money on incarceration.
I think I think it's commendable that he's talking about it, and we also need to talk about you know, these individuals that we've had in our community, some as long as the amnesty of Reagan, which was 83. I mean, these are the people that we're talking about, 83 to now. A Mexican man with his family, children in college, that could be the undocumented citizen that we're talking about that Scott wants to incarcerate and send to an ICE facility and then ship him out of here. And who will pay for that? Local governments will pay for it, cities, sheriffs in our jail, and so I hope that we really think of all these unintended consequences before we go forward with that.
So the amnesty issue that George Bush Jr. proposed was really what we're going to have to agree to, and you're going to have to agree to a time frame for people coming into this country. You got here illegally, but you got 5 years to make it up, and you get to pay this much this way, and you're going to be paying taxes. You can do all the right steps, but you're going to have to come under regulation. And we have a big border to control. It's cheaper to do it that way.
Let me
Now,
say, Augie,
let me-
let me just one other thing, and Kelly can help me with this. Kelly did an article on the number of undocumented illegal aliens who work here, who pay into Social Security, and what was that number? Do you remember that? That you in fact told me
Sure.
this.
And I wrote it in that same article I referenced earlier, but I talked to people in the Social Security Administration. There's this fallacy out there that
That they don't pay.
Well, that
But
they
they
don't
do.
that
But
they
they
don't
do.
pay taxes,
And
and
they do.
that they just consume health care and services, and they're
This
on
is
the dole.
nonsense.
It is nonsense.
And the fact what they don't get the
so
benefit.
So number one, a lot of them have large families. So they're some of the biggest spenders of sales tax in our community. That for us as municipal governments, that's our bread and butter to do infrastructure projects. The second one is Social Security tax. Because they're undocumented, all of the Social Security dollars that are being paid, and by the way, if you have a bad Social Security number, they won't notify your employer for 12 months.
Wow.
So they'll collect for 12 months. When I asked the question in 2004 or 5 to the Social Security Administration, it was $500 billion, not accounting for any earned interest on
Half
that.
$1 trillion plus interest.
Yeah.
Wow.
In an account of unclaimed funds.
That these people will never
And they'll
have
never-
access to.
Yeah.
And so they're contributing, and they don't know it, and the public generally doesn't know it, essentially.
Well, the Hispanics know it, but
they know it, but they can't do nothing about it.
Of course, yeah.
They're helpless.
So and the last thing, on that, the DREAM Act, there was a process there, and there was a reason a lot of conservative Republicans supported it. It was 10 years. It was not an amnesty, and it also said you need to serve in the military or you need to get a college degree, and both of which are things that are going to help our country. So the fact that this cheap populism that right now is rampant in this country and that people are hiding behind it, it really doesn't serve the economic interests of this country. It doesn't serve to produce a more educated populace for these children that
Their immediate, their immediate response is, "So you say." My opinion is as good as yours. No, I mean that's the attitude.
Let me be the old political dog here, okay?
All right.
Because this Hispanic bloc represents such a large voting bloc, the Republicans didn't want this amnesty bill to look like it was done by the Democrats. You watch under this Republican Congress, this bill will come up again.
So you're predicting.
And it will be broadcast as the Republicans did it, not the liberal Democrats.
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. So when the unemployment runs out for the 13 months, then it's going to be much easier to end the tax breaks, the Bush tax cuts, because in that next year, those people will be no longer unemployed. They won't be a factor in the election year.
No.
So that'll kill the tax cuts, and the lame duck.
Well, let's hope we change the tax system.
We're making that.
Let's
just talk about one more thing. And so the effect on all of these situations really comes down to education, incarceration, all variety, and so forth. And I had Mike Bennett on my show. We talked about a sales tax. You mentioned VAT tax in the pre-show situation, which I would love to have gotten into. We need to do another show. That's what we need to do if you have some time. But Bennett and I more or less agreed that a sales tax in the state of Florida, perhaps big enough to replace or begin to replace much of this property tax, since this governor proposed reducing property taxes. I say, let's get rid of property taxes and find a way to do it.
Well, from my, number one, that would be an incredibly regressive solution. Number two, how? Because your family in public housing that is a single mother with 3 children, is the percentage of her income that she's paying for that, as opposed to the individual who's living on Lido Key, is ridiculously greater for that.
In what way? I mean, if for example, if you had a sales tax that exempted medical, food, and say $500 of rent.
Are we going to get rid of all the loopholes too that are in the current sales?
Of course, like the free box seats up in the Tampa Buck games that pay no tax.
Sure.
That's called low-hanging fruit, though.
Right. Well, and the other side is to somehow depend on that sales tax to be a consistent revenue stream. I think we've learned in this recession that the bottom can fall out like that. So.
Well, it can fall out on property values as well, and it has done that. One of the things, again, looking beyond our borders, the state of South Carolina reduced their property taxes significantly and used and increased the sales tax for education. The biggest lump of money that we spend on property taxes is education. Now, South Carolina is a lot becoming like Florida with a lot of tourism. You know, one of the probably more predictable than our housing prices is the fact that we're going to have tourist spendings. Disney is the single largest destination in the world for tourists. So I, like you, Augie, believe that we'd be much better off, you know, lowering our property taxes, because our property taxes have gotten to the point that they're actually forcing not just poor people out of housing, but middle class people as well.
Tax.
Exactly.
Property tax is a death tax.
Exactly.
I think that's a bit of hyperbole. We were just with a couple.
Here's where I become a fiscal conservative in that direction.
I don't think that this is an issue of fiscal conservative. I think it's an issue of what's prudent and what's not a regressive policy for your population.
How do you get to a revenue stream to support the government? We got 2 minutes left.
How do we get to a revenue stream
that supports education and all the things we need to do in government in the state of Florida?
I think it needs to come from a diversified basket.
Give me 3 areas.
Well, I think we have probably 3 right now. You have your property tax, you have sales tax, and we also have a gas tax that basically is for our transportation infrastructure.
But the gas tax is like a sales tax.
Yeah, true.
So why not simplify the thing, which is what South Carolina has done.
Right.
Well, I don't know too much about South Carolina, but perhaps we can discuss that at a future show.
We got 1 minute left. I'd like each of you to say the most important things you feel are going to affect this community, and each one of you take turns. Kerry?
Well, the city of Sarasota, I think that they have to go to a defined contribution from a defined benefit plan for retirees. We're spending entirely too much money on retirement benefits that we can't afford to, which is leaving the city with less and less money to pay for needed services of maintenance of infrastructure and really progressing the city down the road.
Okay.
That's certainly something that I would agree with, the whole city commission would agree with. There's an article in today's newspaper about a city, I believe in Mississippi, that's declared bankruptcy, told all of their pensioners they can no longer pay. That's not a place where we want to get to ever.
And if we don't get a hold of our national debt, Moody's may make the decision for us. The bond market will collapse. Pensions will go right with that. It's an interesting circumstance we're facing as a nation. We're winding this up. Kelly, it is wonderful. It's a great holiday time. Yeah. If we can do this again, I'd love to do it.
Yes, enjoyed it, Augie. Yeah. Have a wonderful holiday.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great father-son relationship. Brilliant.